A message inviting you to hang out appears on your phone screen on a weekend evening. You stare at it for a few seconds, then decline with a short reply. "I'll stay home tonight." On the other side of the screen, people might assume that you are being lazy, lacking energy, or starting to become difficult to approach. In an era where busyness is often celebrated, turning down a social gathering in order to choose quiet time at home is sometimes viewed as a troubling step backward. Yet Carl Jung, who devoted his entire life to deciphering the deepest layers of the human mind, saw the need to withdraw from social rhythms through a completely different lens. There are moments when our psychological system requires a temporary step back from the rushing flow of the world in order to recalibrate itself. This is absolutely not an escape from reality. On the contrary, it is an intelligent mechanism of the mind at work. So if lately you have felt a growing desire to stay home more often, to return to a quiet space, it is not necessarily a sign that you are losing your motivation for life. It may very well mean that you are entering an important chapter of psychological maturity, a phase in which the soul needs to recharge and rediscover its direction. In today's video, we will explore why staying home can sometimes be the kindest and most necessary thing you can do for your own soul. By the time you reach the end of this content, you may realize that the silence you once feared as isolation is actually the beginning of a profound journey of self-understanding. 1. Staying home creates the silence where intuition can speak. Moments when our living space becomes truly quiet often bring a very special feeling. It is not the empty, cold silence that makes a person feel lonely. Instead, it is a vibrant stillness, like the feeling of opening wide the door of a room that has been closed for a long time. The air feels lighter, and the mind begins to relax. Within that precious quiet, the streams of thought that have been racing all day suddenly begin to slow down. Important questions that we once brushed aside in the whirlwind of work begin to appear more clearly. And in the middle of that stillness, a subtle sensation begins to emerge. It is not a dry, logical argument or a complicated inner struggle, but simply a gentle form of knowing. People often call this intuition, yet very few truly understand how it operates. In Carl Jung's system of analytical psychology, intuition is not something mystical or vague. Jung considered intuition one of the 4 fundamental psychological functions of the human mind, alongside thinking, feeling, and sensation. Each of these functions acts as a lens through which we perceive and interpret the world in different ways. If thinking helps us analyze logically and feeling helps us evaluate the value of events, then intuition helps us grasp the deeper meaning of what is unfolding and sense the possibilities that are beginning to take shape. Jung summarized this with a well-known definition. Intuition is perception via the unconscious. In other words, intuition is the mind's ability to receive information through the unconscious, not through step-by-step logical reasoning, but through a holistic connection among countless experiences, memories, and emotions accumulated in the deeper layers of the psyche. Jung often emphasized that intuition rarely speaks clearly in environments that are too noisy. When we are constantly reacting to the outside world, the mind automatically prioritizes faster and more practical functions, especially logical thinking. In social life, logic functions like a protective armor. It allows us to explain our viewpoints, defend our choices, and adapt to the expectations of others. But when logic occupies the entire space of the mind, intuition, which is subtle and quiet, easily becomes buried. Intuition never tries to compete with logic by arguing or shouting. It is more like an underground current flowing quietly beneath the surface of consciousness. If the lake of the mind is constantly stirred by external disturbances, we will never be able to see that current. This is precisely why the private space of home becomes the place where intuition can finally emerge. When we are no longer pressured to prove ourselves, respond immediately, or defend our viewpoints, the mind softens. And in that state of stillness, the subtle signals of the unconscious finally have a chance to be heard. Many people have experienced this during quiet evenings spent alone. A decision that once seemed perfectly reasonable suddenly begins to feel slightly wrong, even though there is no clear evidence. Or during a calm afternoon, you may suddenly realize that you need to walk away from a certain relationship, even while your rational mind still insists that everything is fine. These aha moments are not random fantasies. There are moments when intuition illuminates truths that have long existed but were previously hidden. From a Jungian perspective, this is the moment when the unconscious sends coded messages to consciousness. Each person's unconscious contains an enormous archive, repressed emotions, tiny details from everyday interactions, and life experiences accumulated over many years. When we are constantly busy, these pieces of information remain scattered. Only when the mind slows down does the unconscious begin the process of synthesizing, organizing them into meaningful images and feelings. Intuition is the bridge, the moment when that connection becomes strong enough for consciousness to recognize it. Sometimes the most important life changes do not begin with a dramatic event, but with a very ordinary evening. The story of Helen illustrates this perfectly. From the outside, Helen's life appeared quite successful. A stable job, a wide network of relationships, and a packed social calendar. For many years, Helen believed she was on the right path, but gradually, an unnamed exhaustion began to emerge. It was not merely physical fatigue, it was a subtle misalignment between her current lifestyle and the voice within her. One weekend evening, Helen decided to stay home instead of attending a party as usual. In the quiet of her home, a question suddenly surfaced in her mind with remarkable clarity. Is this job truly meant for me? The remarkable thing was that the question did not come with panic. It arrived like an obvious truth, similar to the moment when you suddenly realize that the shirt you are wearing has been too tight for a long time. According to Jung's theory, that evening was not the moment Helen began analyzing data. It was the moment her intuition completed its task. In reality, the process had been unfolding quietly for a long time, through small experiences at work, and through the moments when she had to stretch herself to meet other people's expectations. Only when she had the quiet space of home did intuition finally have enough room to deliver its message. This awakening did not lead to impulsive actions. Instead, it opened a process of calm observation, allowing Helen to gradually integrate intuition and reason to discover a life path that felt more authentic to her true self. However, Jung also offered an important warning. We must clearly distinguish between intuition and fear. When people are under stress, they often mistake anxiety or worry for gut feelings. Someone might refuse an opportunity out of fear of failure, while convincing themselves that intuition advised them to do so. The difference lies in the quality of the feeling. Fear tends to be urgent and tense, causing the body to tighten and the mind to panic. Genuine intuition, on the other hand, is calm, balanced, and unhurried. It does not force you to act immediately. It simply brings a quiet clarity. I know this is right, or this no longer fits who I am. The peaceful space of home is the best filter for recognizing this difference. When the nervous system is soothed, subtle signals become clearer. This is why life-changing decisions rarely emerge in tense meeting rooms, but instead appear while we are brewing a cup of tea, reading a book, or simply gazing out the window. Therefore, spending time at home and embracing silence is not a sign of retreat or disconnection from the world. On the contrary, it is one of the most important activities for the development of the soul. That quiet space allows us to reconnect with signals that the noise of everyday life has obscured. Intuition is not meant to replace reason, but to guide reason into deeper territory. When intuition and logic move together, we not only make decisions that are reasonable, but decisions that are truly aligned with who we are. So if at times you feel a strong desire to stay home more often, understand that this is not a withdrawal. It is the moment when your mind is seeking a necessary quiet to hear a familiar voice that has long been forgotten. That voice is not loud or dramatic, yet it carries a profound message. The most authentic direction of your life has always been there, simply waiting for you to become quiet enough to recognize it. And this is only a small part of the story. According to Carl Jung, the desire to stay home is not necessarily a retreat from the world. It may actually be the first step on the journey back to yourself. Stay with us to discover why. 2. Home is where psychic energy is restored. In the relentless pace of modern life, we often unconsciously forget an obvious truth. Each person's psychic energy is not an infinite resource. Every social interaction, every effort to please others, and every moment when we force ourselves to appear stable while our inner world is falling apart, all consume a certain amount of invisible life force. What matters is that this depletion rarely happens dramatically. It unfolds quietly and persistently, like tiny streams of water leaking from a vessel we still assume is full. Only when night falls, when we return home and sink into a familiar chair, does the feeling of exhaustion begin to close in, making us realize how much we have truly been drained. That exhaustion is not a sign of weakness or inadequacy. On the contrary, it is a pure signal from the psyche striving to protect and restore itself. Carl Jung, the founder of analytical psychology, explained this through the concept of psychic energy, also known as libido. Unlike Freud's narrower definition, which tied libido to sexual instinct, Jung saw libido as the total life energy, the fuel behind all thinking, creativity, connection, and our ability to face the upheavals of life. Jung distilled this into a central operating principle. But there is no energy unless there is a tension of opposites. It always moves between two poles, turning outward toward the external world, extraversion, and turning inward toward the inner world, introversion. When this balance leans too far to one side for too long, the psychological system inevitably falls into a state of serious imbalance. In today's digital age, the flow of human energy is almost constantly forced outward. We spend most of our time responding to stimuli from the world, work pressure, the expectations of partners and colleagues, and complex social roles. Every persona you put on demands a certain energetic cost. When you patiently listen to a friend's pain, you are paying with emotional energy. When you suppress your anger to maintain peace in a meeting, you are using psychic energy to control your instinctive reaction. Even trying to be the stable one, so that you can serve as an anchor for your family, means carrying part of other people's emotions for them. These actions are not bad. They are the threads that connect human beings. But the mistake lies in forgetting that after every act of spending, energy must be drawn back in to be renewed. This is precisely where the home becomes a place of special spiritual significance. The power of home does not lie in lifeless concrete walls, but in the way it establishes a safe boundary where psychic energy can reverse direction. Instead of continuing to dissipate outward, that stream of energy begins to flow back inward to soothe the self. This feeling is real. The moment you take off tight shoes, release the tension in your shoulders, and sit down with yourself, a gentle restoration begins. Here, you do not need to explain, perform, or meet anyone's standards. That pure simplicity is the perfect environment for psychological recovery. From a Jungian perspective, exhaustion does not arise only from conflict or toxic relationships. What is fascinating is that even the healthiest relationships can drain us if we do not know how to maintain balance. You may have wonderful friends and kind colleagues, but if in every interaction you are always the understanding one, the peacemaker, the keeper of warmth, your energy battery will still gradually run dry. This is especially true for women, who are often socially assigned the role of emotional regulators for family and community. Without private moments of silence, it becomes very difficult to recognize our own depletion. Only in the absolute stillness of home, when no one is demanding our attention, can we hear the sigh of the inner self and ask an honest question: after this interaction, do I feel fuller or emptier? That question is the key to recognizing the flow of libido. If we never pause to feel, every relationship will seem more or less the same, but in silence, the difference becomes clear. Some connections are nourishing and leave behind warmth, while others invisibly drain our energy. Imagine your mind as a battery. Every social interaction is a device drawing power from it. Some devices are like a small light bulb, but others consume energy like an industrial machine. Living for years in a low battery state without recharging is the root of emotional numbness and the loss of direction in life. Home, then, functions like a spiritual charging station. It is not a place to escape reality, but a place where we can reposition ourselves before returning to it. In the stillness, psychological boundaries begin to form. Jung understood that personal growth requires us to distinguish clearly between what is truly our nature and what are merely expectations imposed by others. Staying home alone creates the space in which we realize that we have the right to say no, the right not to reply to messages immediately, and the right to reduce relationships that only take without ever replenishing. This is not selfishness. It is necessary for preservation. A person whose energy has been completely depleted cannot offer anything real to anyone. By contrast, when you know how to return to yourself, you begin to build an inner strength stable enough to connect with the world more sincerely and more sustainably. On a deeper level, the home is also a symbol of the structure of the soul. Each room represents a fragment of consciousness, memory, and the unconscious. If we spend all our time standing on the porch greeting guests and never step inside, we become strangers in our own souls. Spending time at home is the moment when we enter those inner rooms to reorganize and renew our energy. In summary, the desire to stay home, to be quiet, is not a sign of retreat or isolation. It is a natural, self-healing instinct of the psyche. Just as the body needs sleep to restore itself physically, the mind needs spaces free from intrusion so that energy can return to its center. Staying home is how we keep ourselves from being drained by the outside world to the point of losing our identity. It is the path by which we remain ourselves, fully and firmly, in the midst of countless upheavals. 3. Staying home helps us recognize the repressed shadow. In many people's imagination, being at home and temporarily separated from the hurried rhythm outside should bring an immediate sense of relief. Yet reality often unfolds according to a very different script. As the noisy sounds of work, constant notifications, relentless messages, appointments, and social conversations begin to fade, another kind of sound, more subtle and primal, begins to rise. It is not the echo of the outside world, but the voice of the deep inner world. Emotions we thought had long fallen asleep suddenly awaken. An old fragment of memory unexpectedly returns, or an unnamed sadness quietly takes hold of the mind on a silent afternoon. These experiences often leave us confused. Many people wonder why, when they are at home, instead of feeling peaceful right away, they begin to confront emotional layers that feel so complex and heavy. Through the lens of Carl Jung's psychology, this phenomenon is not abnormal or a sign of instability. On the contrary, it is an essential and entirely natural part of every person's psychological structure. To describe the parts of the self that have been pushed down into the unconscious, Jung used a classic concept, the shadow. This concept is often misunderstood narrowly, as if it referred only to evil or negativity. But for Jung, the shadow carried a much broader meaning. It includes all aspects of ourselves that our conscious mind does not want to acknowledge or does not yet know how to accept. It may be the simmering anger we learned to suppress from childhood, the jealousy we feel ashamed to touch, or the fear of abandonment that makes us constantly play the role of the one who tries to please everyone. The shadow may even contain positive seeds that have long been denied, such as a burning creative longing, the need to be genuinely loved, or the desire to live a life different from society's templates. Jung offered a striking and awakening observation about this process. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This statement is not pessimistic in tone. On the contrary, it is a firm reminder that true psychological maturity always begins with the courage to look directly at the corners of ourselves we have long avoided. In this journey, being at home and enjoying the stillness of private life plays a critically important role. When human beings are swept into a constant cycle of busyness, they rarely have the chance to come into contact with their own shadow. Work pressure, the distractions of social media, and everyday responsibilities create a highly effective veil. That veil keeps us so occupied that we lose the ability to feel ourselves deeply. As a result, sadness, dissatisfaction, and old wounds do not disappear at all. They are merely pushed down into the deepest layers of the unconscious, waiting for an opportunity to take shape again. Only when life slows down, when we stay at home long enough and are no longer dominated by external stimuli, does the shadow begin to reveal itself more clearly. Even then, it rarely appears in the form of a neatly defined idea. Instead, it often arrives through vague psychological states. A lingering sadness with no obvious cause, anxious restlessness, even though everything seems fine, or a difficult-to-explain emptiness, as if some part within you is longing for attention and comfort. These experiences sometimes make people feel that being alone is deeply uncomfortable. Their natural response is to quickly return to busyness, to avoid confronting such raw emotions. But according to Jung, this moment is actually a golden opportunity for psychological growth. The shadow is not dangerous when it appears. What is truly dangerous is when it is denied and continues to operate blindly in the unconscious. When a part of the self has been rejected for too long, it does not disappear. It looks for indirect ways to erupt. For example, a person who always tries to maintain a calm and kind exterior may explode in fierce anger over something minor. A person who refuses to face their fear of abandonment may keep repeating relationship patterns that wound them. Or someone who buries a creative dream may feel a deep emptiness inside, even though outwardly their life appears successful. In all of these cases, the shadow is directing behavior from behind the scenes without their awareness. We can find a vivid example of confronting the shadow in the life of Jane Goodall, the brilliant scientist known for her research on chimpanzees. When she was young, she spent years living in isolation in the forests of Tanzania. Those long stretches of time immersed in nature, away from familiar social structures, not only help her understand animals, they also open up an exploration into her own mind. Goodall once shared that in the early months, she went through extremely complex emotional states. Without the usual busy rhythms to cling to, she began to recognize thoughts and feelings she had never truly noticed before. Loneliness, childhood memories returning, and doubts about her own abilities. Rather than pushing them away, she chose to observe them objectively, much like the way she observed the creatures in the forest. She realized that when people are no longer swept along by busyness, the mind naturally opens its deepest layers. From a Jungian perspective, what Jane Goodall experienced was the process of approaching the shadow peacefully. By allowing those emotions to exist and be recognized, they gradually lost their manipulative power in the unconscious and became valuable data through which she could understand herself more deeply. The shadow is not merely a storage place for negative things that need to be removed. It also contains energy, creativity, and the most authentic aspects of the human being. When we dare to look at it, even the most uncomfortable emotions can become material for building a stronger self. The home, in the stillness of private space, is where this process of transformation begins. It does not require dramatic turning points. Sometimes it is simply a small realization. You suddenly understand that you are actually very angry, even though your mouth keeps saying, "It's fine." You notice that your jealousy is pointing toward a dream you accidentally abandoned, or you recognize the fear that is quietly controlling your relationships. These moments can make us feel fragile, but at the same time, they also bring a genuine freedom. When an emotion is named and brought into the light, it no longer has the power to control you from the dark. This is the very first step of individuation, the journey of becoming your own whole and unique self. In that sense, staying home is not merely physical rest, but a door opening into the rich inner world. In that quiet, the forgotten parts of the self begin to find their way back. Staying home does not distance us from life. On the contrary, it helps us reunite with the deepest parts of ourselves. And when those parts are understood and accepted, we not only understand ourselves more clearly, but also begin to enter into a more truthful and profound relationship with life itself. 4. Staying home is the moment when we remove our social roles. The light in a small room each evening can sometimes bring a feeling entirely different from the bright glare of the world outside. That difference does not lie in the intensity of the light, but in the fact that within that private space, a person can finally begin to relax the things they have been forcing themselves to hold together all day long. Here, the expressions on the face no longer need to be adjusted to please the person in front of us. The voice no longer needs to maintain a proper or polite tone. The natural reactions that were suppressed during social interactions are now free to return. And it is precisely in that quiet moment that many people suddenly realize a surprising truth. All day long, they have been playing roles far more than they realized. In Carl Jung's system of analytical psychology, this phenomenon is clearly explained through the concept of persona. Jung borrowed this Latin term, originally meaning the mask worn by actors in ancient theatre, to refer to the psychological mask each person uses to adapt to the social environment. He recognized that in everyday life, each of us is in fact behaving like a true actor on the stage of life. Persona functions as an intermediary mechanism, helping human beings move smoothly through relationships. Thanks to it, we know how to remain professional in the workplace, how to appear polite with strangers, and how to regulate our emotions in order to avoid unnecessary conflicts. Without persona, social life would fall into chaos and lose its sense of order. For this reason, Jung did not regard persona as something negative. On the contrary, he affirmed that it is an essential part of social adaptation. However, Jung also offered an extremely subtle warning about its potential danger. When a mask is worn for too long and too tightly, a person may begin to forget that it is merely a tool of adaptation and not their true essence. He expressed this idea through a profound statement: the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. In other words, persona is not who we truly are, but only the image that society, and sometimes we ourselves, believe us to be. When this confusion occurs, we gradually lose our connection with the self. Try looking back at an ordinary day of your own life, and you will see the presence of persona clearly. In the morning, when you step into the office, you put on the appearance of a professional employee, careful in every word, controlled in your facial expressions, and composed in the way the environment demands. Then, when you return to your family, you may become a dutiful child, caring sister, or a patient mother. In gatherings with friends, you become cheerful, humorous, and always ready to listen. Even in love, you may unconsciously play the role of the understanding partner, the stable support who is always ready to help the other person. Each of these roles carries positive meaning and often arises from good intentions. Yet what we rarely notice is the cost of constant adjustment. You must keep refining the way you speak, the way you express emotion, and the way you respond to the world around you. Over time, those adjustments become fixed habits, and when there is no private space in which to rest from these performances, we begin to fall into confusion between our social roles and our true selves. This is exactly why many people, even when they have achieved success and have stable relationships, still cannot escape an inexplicable emptiness. That emptiness does not come from a lack of material comfort or affection, but because the true I within no longer has any room to exist. Persona has come to occupy almost the entire surface of conscious life. It is at this point that the home with its absolute privacy becomes a special psychological sanctuary. When the door closes, the judging gaze of society is temporarily erased. No one is evaluating every expression on your face anymore. No one is waiting for the right response from you. And there are no longer any unspoken rules demanding that you always be stable or cheerful. In that space, we are given the chance to experience something rare, the freedom to exist without having to play any role at all. At home, you have the right not to force a polite smile when you do not truly feel happy. You have the right not to answer messages immediately, just to maintain a pleasant image in the eyes of others. You are allowed to remain silent without having to explain why. These small things create an incredibly important psychological space. In that space, the persona mask can be set down, and once it is removed, the real person finally has a chance to breathe again. We can see this clearly in the story of Wendy, a woman working in customer service. Wendy always impressed people with her pleasantness, gentleness, and willingness to help. She was the model employee, the friend who kept the peace, and the dutiful daughter. From the outside, Wendy seemed to possess every admirable quality. But in reality, after every day of showing up so perfectly, when she returned home, she felt exhausted to the core. This was not muscular tiredness, but the depletion of psychic energy caused by having to maintain an overly perfect persona all day long. Many evenings, Wendy simply wanted to sit quietly on the sofa, turn off every connection, and stop playing the role of the understanding one for anyone else. At first, she felt guilty and wondered whether she was becoming selfish or distant. However, after encountering Carl Jung's ideas, she realized that this feeling was not something negative. It was a signal that her persona had been worn for too long and was beginning to suffocate her true being. According to Jungian theory, when the persona becomes too powerful, the authentic self is pushed into the dark regions of the unconscious. This does not mean that we are being fake. In fact, many people wear masks very sincerely. They truly want to be good, to be understanding, and to please others. But if those qualities are constantly displayed without ever being allowed to rest, the psychological system will defend itself through exhaustion. Wendy learned to give herself moments of not performing. She began setting her phone aside and learning to say, "I need rest today," without explaining. Those small changes brought her a deep sense of relief, a feeling of being herself that she had forgotten for so long. From Jung's perspective, this is an important step in the process of individuation. A person cannot become a whole version of themselves if they exist only through social masks. We need spaces where the mask can be removed, where we do not have to prove who we are to anyone. Home, in this sense, is not only a physical shelter, but also a psychological space that allows a person to return to their roots. When the gaze of the world is no longer upon us, we can feel more clearly what we truly think, truly feel, and truly need. Therefore, staying home sometimes carries a deeper meaning than simply closing a door. It is the moment when we lay down the heavy roles we have been carrying all day. It is the moment when our face no longer has to express anything for anyone else. It is the moment when we are allowed not to be the one who is always okay, not to be the one who is always cheerful, not to be the one who is always understanding. At home, in its deepest meaning, is not the place where we try to become a better version of ourselves, but the place where we are allowed not to be anyone at all. And it is precisely in that nameless space that our true self has the chance to be reborn. If these reflections have made you look at yourself in a different way, take a second to hit like, so that these deep perspectives can reach more people. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel, because in the next videos, we will continue exploring the deeper layers of the human psyche through the lens of Carl Jung to understand ourselves more clearly, live more lightly, and gradually return to our truest selves. 5. Staying home is part of the journey back to yourself. In the flow of life, there are phases when the things that once excited us suddenly begin to lose their color. It is like a familiar melody that is still playing, yet our heart no longer vibrates to its old rhythm. Gatherings that were once filled with laughter now bring a strange fatigue. Conversations that we once entered naturally and enthusiastically suddenly become heavy and forced, especially when we feel that we must spend too much energy explaining ourselves to others. At some point in the middle of an ordinary day, a hard-to-name feeling begins to take over. We no longer want to keep living on autopilot. These experiences often plant anxiety within us. We begin to wonder whether we are becoming closed off or whether we are slowly drifting away from the real world. Yet through Carl Jung's profound perspective, these moments carry a completely different meaning. They are not signs of collapse, but signals that our psyche is entering a deeper stage of maturity. Jung called this journey by a core concept: individuation, the process of becoming oneself. It must be understood that individuation does not mean separating from society or turning one's back on the community. Jung never regarded human beings as isolated entities existing apart from others. On the contrary, individuation is a process of transformation in which a person gradually frees themselves from the unconscious control of collective expectations to rediscover their true inner center. Jung captured the spirit of this journey in an enduring statement: "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." At first glance, this may sound simple, but in reality, most of us do not begin life from that place of authentic selfhood. From childhood, we are taught how to adapt in order to survive. We learn to be a good child so that our parents will love us, and to be a good student so that teachers will approve of us. As adults, we strive to become reliable employees, likable friends, or responsible members of the family. These roles help us establish our place in society, but at the same time, they construct a solid psychological structure based on the expectations of the collective. For many years, we may live peacefully within that structure, but at some point of transition in life, that structure suddenly becomes narrow and suffocating. The values that once mattered begin to lose their pull. Familiar activities no longer bring a sense of aliveness. Many people describe this experience as walking along a familiar road for years, only to stop short one day because they realize they are no longer sure whether this road is truly meant for them. According to Jungian theory, this is the moment when an old psychological structure is gradually losing its influence to make room for something new. When that happens, the soul needs enough space to reorganize itself, and in this context, staying home, in the symbolic sense of turning inward, becomes an essential part of the journey. Staying home is not merely being present in a physical space. It is a psychological state in which we temporarily disconnect from the constant flow of social stimuli. Here, no conversations are demanding immediate replies, no roles we must strain ourselves to maintain, and most importantly, no silent gaze judging whether we are living correctly or not. It is within that quiet space that the subtlest signals of the soul begin to appear. It may be a heavy feeling when thinking about the old path, not because it is wrong, but because it no longer contains the person you are becoming. It may be a sudden sense of relief when you dare to imagine an entirely different direction. And sometimes, it is simply a quiet but powerful desire to live more truthfully in relation to yourself. These signals rarely reveal themselves in the noise of everyday life. They are like stars that can only shine when the sky is dark enough. When people are swept into the vortex of work and social networks, the mind becomes too disturbed to recognize those subtle movements. But when life slows down, when we allow ourselves to stay home long enough, those signals become clearer and sharper than ever. To picture this process, imagine the mind as a compass. When it is constantly shaken by outside forces, the needle wavers endlessly and cannot point in the right direction. But when it is placed upon a still surface, the needle gradually steadies and turns toward the north. Human psychology works in the same way. When life is too busy, our inner compass needle is constantly disturbed by the opinions and expectations of others. Only when we create moments of silence, can the psychological system stabilize itself again, and only then does our true direction begin to reveal itself. What is interesting is that when individuation truly begins, people often enter a very special psychological state. They no longer feel the same intense need to prove themselves. In earlier stages, we often long to explain who we are, what we are doing, and to convince the world that we are on the right path. But when inner understanding has ripened, that need for proof gradually disappears. Not because we become indifferent to the world, but because we have begun to live from a more solid center. When you know clearly what truly gives meaning to your life, you no longer need external validation. You simply live and act according to the guidance of your inner life. From Jung's perspective, this is the turning point of psychological maturity. Individuation does not make a person distant. On the contrary, it allows us to return to society with an entirely new stance. Instead of reacting to the world based on other people's expectations, we begin to choose how to participate in life more consciously and actively. It is like steering a boat across a vast ocean. Without a compass and direction, the boat will be carried aimlessly by wind and waves. But once you know the route, you are still sailing on the same ocean, only now you are the one at the helm, instead of letting the current decide your fate. In that sense, staying home, in its deepest meaning, is the period when we bring the boat of our life into stillness to reassess its direction. It is the moment when we listen to the inner movements that busyness once covered up. It is the time when we ask ourselves the questions the machinery of daily life rarely allows. What truly matters? What is a merely meaningless habit? And what have I been doing for far too long, only because it was expected of me? So if you feel that you need more time for yourself, understand that it is not a sign of retreat. It is a sacred phase in the journey back to yourself, a phase in which you temporarily step away from familiar performances to hear the deep voice of the soul. And when this process unfolds, the outside world does not disappear. You still return to work, relationships, and responsibilities, but with an entirely different posture, less reactive, less eager to please, and far more capable of making conscious choices. Staying home, in its highest meaning, is not about closing the door on life. It is a necessary stage of psychological maturity through which we rediscover our own inner axis. And once that axis has been found, you do not lose the world at all. You simply begin to step into that world with a self that is more authentic, more grounded, and more whole than ever before. In common understanding, when someone wants to stay home more and separate from the crowd, they are often quickly labeled as lazy, socially avoidant, or lacking motivation. But when viewed through Carl Jung's lens, the picture becomes entirely different. The need to be alone is sometimes not a negative retreat, but a very intelligent self-regulating mechanism of the psyche, one that helps us remove social roles, reclaim our energy, and return to listening to the deep voice within. What matters is not how long we stay home or how often we go out, but our ability to respect our own natural rhythm. Life always moves in cycles. There are phases when we need to reach outward and connect with the world, and there are also phases when we need to step back to understand ourselves more deeply. And when we are brave enough to enter that inner life, a very subtle transformation takes place. We return to the world not with exhaustion, but with a steadier presence. No longer living to please everyone, but to fulfill the greatest privilege of a lifetime, to be ourselves. If today's reflections on Carl Jung have touched your own experience, please hit like, share the video, and subscribe to the channel. Your support will help us continue exploring Jungian psychology and the journey of self-understanding together.